The Locked On Podcast Network presents The Big 6 in 60. The 6 biggest national sports stories from the local experts of the Locked On Podcast Network. Get the real story, why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 60 minutes. The Big 6 in 60 starts now with the biggest story in sports.
From the land of the free and the home of the Chiefs, this is the Locked On Chiefs podcast.
This has been a long time coming, and according to Andy Reid, on what looked like a very cold practice day on Wednesday, was able to get a little bit of an opinion on what's going on with the big three names, and that is DJ Humphries, Charles Omenihu, and Isaiah Pacheco. Now, on the two returners, don't have confirmation yet. We expect that they should be re-signed and reactivated, available for this game against the Raiders. What happens after that is a question mark. Now, it hasn't happened yet. I don't know that it's 1,000%, but it does feel pretty likely to me at this point. How about you?
I'd say it's likely because they actually open up the roster spots at this point. Peyton Hendershot got moved to IR, and Cam Thomas got released. And I didn't see Cam Thomas get added back to the practice squad, which is kind of interesting. So I'm curious to see if that happens in the coming days. Hate to see Hendershot go. I'm not going to say that he brought a lot to the Chiefs, but he did bring juice. He did bring a little bit of energy, and they have really gotten hammered at that position. They're down to their, sixth tight end if they bring somebody up in the practice squad this season. And that's after being down to your lower level wide receivers too, and bringing in DeAndre Hopkins. So lots of different things going on there. And Matt Schrader's out too. It sounds like they're going to have Matt Wright and a new kicker this week, which it's just all the injuries. It's just crazy.
Yeah, it certainly piles up this time of year, and especially when it starts to get cold. If you're playing outdoor games, it's just more likely that you're going to have some soft tissue stuff. I will say this: I won't necessarily expect right yet. We'll see. I felt like Andy's answer was a little bit, we're going to play it by ear. Maybe not a direct answer to that. So they could go either way. That's good to know. I do feel like it is in the air that Pacheco should be back, Omenihu should be back. But I think that means very different things for those two guys in this ball game. I do feel like if Isaiah Pacheco is back on the roster, taken off the IR, everything's great. I think he should get a couple of touches. My guess is he's been kind of raring to go, to tell you the truth. I'm a little more comfortable with that than I am with Charles Omenihu jumping back into the fray. I'd like to just kind of hold on to that because I do feel the defensive front is a little bit more fragile. And we've been talking a long time about what he does to boost it when he comes back. I want to be a little more careful with that if I'm inside the building. Do you think that they should just throw him back in, or where do you stand?
No, I'd be good with that. I think that they ought to try to bring him along. I don't think that they need to get him super involved early on. I do think that it would be great to get him maybe 10 snaps, maybe 15. Really depends on how the game goes, honestly. Reality is you could maybe just use him and get him out there for a couple of pass rush snaps. If you get some third and longs, put him out there, have him break down inside and see what you can do there. I still think that they need to try to get Uche involved more in this defense as well. So I do think that that's important to try to get that taken care of. And I like what you said about Pacheco. I do think that they ought to use him and they ought to get him a lot more touches than just a couple here and there, because I do think that he is probably ready and raring to go. And it's even more important considering it's a short week and Hunt has been beat up on a regular basis. Yeah. He needs a little bit more rest, and the extra time off after this game will help, but give Pacheco a couple more carries. I wonder if we see Clyde, considering they're not likely to have a third tight end this week. Are they going to have that many running backs up and be able to just kind of move the ball around and do different things? I'm really curious to see what they do there.
Now, while that's one case to deal with two guys that are coming back, obviously Omenihu's been out quite a while. It's a very different thing to bring in and activate someone like DJ Humphries, who was out at practice. If you guys missed my discussion with Matt the other day, go ahead and check that out, as well as getting with Chris, the conversation with Q over from the Raiders. Make sure you go back and listen to both of those, because I feel like they have to ride with what they have right now. I know, especially the specter that is Max Crosby. We're going to talk about him after the break here in a bit. It makes you want to push somebody with experience into the role, because that's the thing that both the Chiefs left tackles are missing right now. Significant experience, although I will say one is come along. He's seen a lot of faces now. Now, if he can buckle down and get a couple of things ironed out, I think especially as long as he can keep from lunging against Max, I think that will help. I think right now, is even if DJ Humphries, and he said he looked like he was in pretty good shape, and that he's kept himself going pretty well. That's great to hear. But I am not going to rush him into playing snaps, especially against Max in a game that, quite frankly, beyond the first quarter, shouldn't be that tight. So I think they ride with Wanya, give him help. I hope some considered help, like we talked earlier in the week about like a sixth offensive lineman. How do you think that it goes, and what would you do?
For me, and I think you and I talked about this earlier in the week, for me, what I would do is I would give him, I don't know however many special team snap they have on field goals, just to get him out there and get him some reps of being out on the field. And that's really few and far between. So it's not like you're taking 5 or 6 snaps in a row. You're taking one snap, you're hitting somebody, you're coming off the field, getting a little bit of rest. You at least get that, the energy of being in a game a little bit. I would use him in that role. I would put him in there as like a lineman on the, on extra points or field goals. And then next week, maybe you get him in and you bring him in, or maybe you even use him as an extra lineman a couple of plays. I'd be okay with that. But you don't put him out there to start. I don't think that that's ever been a thought. And I don't think it ever would have been a thought, even if it was a Sunday game. I don't think that it's enough time for him to come from being injured and not even on the roster to knowing enough of the playbook, one, because you do have to know the playbook as an offensive lineman, regardless of what people think. That is something you have to figure out. And two, you don't want to put him in a situation where he has not really had any kind of hitting all season long, and you're going to put him out there to go against one of the best defensive ends in the NFL. And I know Crosby doesn't generally play on that side, but I guarantee you if Humphrey was a starter there, they'd put Crosby over there just to test him, because that's not a great situation to put a guy in.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's very likely. And unfortunately, that's the thing that they have to deal with right now. What's in front of them is Max Crosby and the group that he leads.
Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. You could take an early look at some Thanksgiving football lines. The Lions are massive favorites in their first game of the day against the Bears. FanDuel has Detroit laying 10.5. Kind of like the Bears. Is that weird? FanDuel also doesn't feel like Caleb Williams and company will put up a lot of points. The Bears total over-under set at 18.5. I might take the over and the Bears to cover. I bet I can get some nice plus odds on that. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
Philadelphia Eagles and the Baltimore Ravens are thriving.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast.
Eagles, Ravens, I think the game of the week across the NFL on Sunday at 4:25. Jalen Hurts versus Lamar Jackson, Saquon Barkley versus Derrick Henry. Gino, it's the top 2 rushing attacks in football, and it was already 2 elite rushing offenses over the last several years, ever since Lamar took over for Baltimore, Jalen took over for Philadelphia. But I don't think it's a coincidence that both of these teams are at the top of the league, and both of them exploited a very overcorrected market at running back this year, where they could get 2 of the best players to ever do it at this position for the same cost as we always use Darnell Mooney. But yesterday I talked about like all these average tight ends that are making the same amount of money. You know, Pat Freiermuth, Cole Kmet, and both of these teams had the flexibility as contenders with complete rosters to go after these players. And it has taken them from, again, an elite level almost to a historic level now. Like, I don't know how teams stop these rushing attacks.
One of the things that I had a little bit of pushback with in regards to this discussion, and I think Marcus Mosher, host of the Locked On Cowboys, made a point about this, that these 3 signings, and Josh Jacobs thrown in there as well, isn't indicative that, quote unquote, running backs don't matter. Rather, it pushes closer to that direction that running backs don't matter. And I was saying in the back of my mind, I kind of feel the opposite. Like, I firmly believe that this is against the grain, that running backs kind of do matter for once, but you do have to have the offensive line. My point and my thinking is these were 3 teams that already had very successful rushing offense. You look at Green Bay with Aaron Jones. You look at what the Baltimore Ravens were able to do with J.K. Dobbins over the last couple of years, in and out of the lineup, and a whole bunch of Gus Edwards in that rotation as well.
Justice Hill,
The Philadelphia Eagles with Miles Sanders and DeAndre Swift and Josh Adams going back a couple more years. But then you bring in an even greater influx of talent at a position where if you have an established offensive line, which all 3 of those teams had, you can only expand on what your run offense already was.
Right.
Because these guys put you at a level that you did not have before. It's like adding nitrous onto a already fast sports car, right? You remember watching the Fast and Furious movies, and they would have that button that they hit, and their cars just got like instantly faster. That's
it's
the
already
injection
a souped up card. They just have the nitro.
Yeah, exactly. That's Saquon Barkley. That's Derrick Henry. That's Josh Jacobs, to the point where these guys do matter. These guys are making a clear difference. These guys are performing at offensive player of the year, MVP level consideration, and all of these teams, outside of, if you're watching the show, Lou just put up a graphic of the top 5 rushers. Chuba Hubbard was in the conversation there as well. Jahmyr Gibbs was number 4, Josh Jacobs 3, Derrick Henry 2, Saquon 1. The top 4, those guys are all on teams that are competing for playoff spots right now, pushing against the grain of what the NFL has become, this pass-heavy league where you and I, for the longest time, said, yeah, you got to be against the grain. You got to be able to throw with the rest of the league. Now you just got to be able to put up points, and it seems like rushing the football might be the way to do that in this day and age.
Yeah, especially in 2024, because there is, Gino, I think both on the field and off the field, a complete market inefficiency when it comes to running the football and running backs, and an overcorrection where the entire league is in unison now, where everybody has the same philosophy on this position. So you could get a Saquon Barkley at a $13 million clip. You could get Josh Jacobs or Derrick Henry for the price of a wide receiver 2 or an average tight end. And look, now they're all the top leading rushers. Saquon leads the league in rushing yards, 2 and 3. Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs. 4 of these 5 guys, Gino, were free agent signings or a first-round pick in the last 2 years. So I'm not suddenly a guy that's going to say, yeah, now every year you pay all the running backs big-time money as much as you'd pay A.J. Brown or a quarterback or a franchise left or right tackle. Like, no, I don't think that's the case now all of a sudden. I don't think because these guys are having success, the league's going to go completely to the opposite side of the spectrum next year. But I do think there will be some median met, right? I think they'll see the success these teams are having. And I think contenders will now say, hey, yes, a running back, they do matter. Like, sure, we could get 70% of the production of these players with a Jordan Mason or a Chuba Hubbard type of player, but why not take it to another level by bringing in one of these players? I think you will see a lot more good teams with complete rosters not just throw these players out. And another guy you can mention in this equation is like a Joe Mixon, who's having success in Houston that we didn't talk about either.
The thing about running backs not mattering is that if everybody thinks that, there's going to be a bunch of guys that do matter that aren't going to get paid. And that's exactly the category that Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, and Josh Jacobs kind of fell in.
This one's so far that like Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley are 2 of the best to ever do it. Like running back not mattering went so far in the league that those guys were available for nothing. I mean, I don't think that'll happen again. If a Bijan Robinson ever hits the open market, I don't think it's going to be this tumbleweed market like it's been for these stars.
There is now a middle ground that is being met to where
Yes.
the Saquon selection, the Ezekiel Elliott selection, those aren't ever going to happen. Like, as good as Ashton Jeanty is,
Yeah.
he's not going to be a top 5 pick
No.
in the National Football League because the value of running backs is clearly lesser than other positions,
Mhm.
but for a certain amount of time, Lou. And that's the thing. If you can get that player for a limited amount of assets in terms of the Eagles, you didn't have to give up anything to go
Nothing.
get said player. Outside of the top 5 rushers, Lou, Chuba Hubbard was a middle round pick. Jahmyr Gibbs was the only one that was a top 15 selection. You might see more running backs go in the first round because teams are identifying this, that they can capitalize on a market where everybody wants to go wide receiver heavy.
Yeah.
Well, now teams are finding their number one wide receivers. They're building their rooms. They're more exorbitant than ever when it comes to numbers. Well, that means running backs are going to fall in the draft. And that's what has happened over the last couple of years. You're going to see a class this year specifically, which has so many guys. I think
It's a good
rounds
class.
2 to 4 are going to be filled with running backs selected. And I wouldn't even be shocked to see the Philadelphia Eagles draft one in that 2 to 4 round frame because of the pushback towards the middle, which running backs were. And what running backs need to be, Lou, they need to be paid like a top 5 player on your offense because of how often they are handling the football, and teams got away from that, and they haven't been paying guys. But then when the outliers come to be, you have to pay them. Those are the guys that you have to go
These are
and get.
outliers. Right. Like, I'm not going to say suddenly you have to go out and pay like a Miles Sanders big time money, Gino, because it is still a very replaceable position from a production standpoint. I mean, just look at some of these guys like Chuba Hubbard, who the Panthers, they paid Miles Sanders all that guaranteed money, and that mid-round guy balls out. Jordan Mason was top 3 in rushing, or top 4, before Christian McCaffrey came back. So it is true that running backs, again, you could find them at a dime a dozen. I just don't think there's going to be a time now where people just throw out a Saquon Barkley or a Derrick Henry, or at least not good teams. Like, I do understand why the Titans didn't bring back Henry, why the Giants didn't bring back Saquon, why the Raiders didn't bring back Jacobs. But again, good teams, I think they're going to see what the Eagles, Packers, and Ravens did and say, yeah, let's try to emulate that. And then I think Howie's going to find another way to zag when everybody else is. And this was just another way to do that. And I did that. That's what I love about Howie. We even did a show together this offseason where we were like, okay, he always says he's going to try to be different. What is it this year? And we nailed it that it was running back. I wonder what it is next year, what he's going to try next.
This is one of those spots that you got to be happy they were proactive in this regard. And I believe that, excuse me, that this isn't the first time they've been proactive at running back. They've been trying to be ahead of the curve. And if you go back to 2017, winning the Super Bowl, without that rushing attack, you don't win any of those games down the stretch. You needed
was the missing
that
piece, for sure.
You truly needed that Jay Ajayi piece. But we're in a world now, Lou, that I think enough teams have gone down that money ball route and seen that we can get enough off the bone to win. But if we truly want those superhero caliber players, you're going to have to pay up. But this isn't we're going to have to overpay for a Gabe Davis like Jacksonville had to do, for example, right? And we're not going to have to overpay for Bryce Huff like the Eagles had to do in terms of edge rusher or teams do at cornerback or any of the other premier positions. This is a position where your overpayment in regard to the rest of the position groups on the football team is so minimal. I think we'll get to a world where numbers get closer to what Christian McCaffrey got in his big extension, but it's never going to get to that level. That was the bubble that burst. I think quarterback is probably the next position where this happens, then probably the premier receiver position, and I would say corner after that, where people just pay, and then it's like, okay, no, we don't really have to pay these guys just because they're the next in line. Running back got like that for a while. It's like, oh, you're the next premier running back, you get an extension, you're next in line, you get an extension, and then teams just said, no, we're just going to franchise these guys if they're special. If they don't want to get franchised, let them go to the open market. And a team like the Eagles, a team like Baltimore, they'll be willing to pay if that is the last shoe to drop in terms of what they need to go win a Super Bowl. And for the Eagles to say otherwise, look at what Miles Sanders and Kenny Gainwell did in that Super Bowl. Do you not think Saquon Barkley would have had a much bigger impact in that football game?
Look at the Ravens and the Chiefs AFC title last year. They needed a Derrick
There you
Henry.
go.
And if they would have got that deal done at the trade deadline and got Henry in Baltimore, maybe they're playing in the Super Bowl against the 49ers and, not the Chiefs. So it's a fascinating discussion. And I think both teams struck at the right time for the right player. And it's why the Eagles and Ravens are two of the best teams in football. A lot of that is because of Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry.
Bills, Niners, Sunday Night Football in Week 13.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, in Week 13, Bills, Niners. And it's time to talk about the keys to victory. If the 49ers are going to go across the country, Sunday Night Football, win in Highmark Stadium, get the upset, right? 6.5-point road dogs. Yeah, it'd be a big win, 6-6. You feel like you're kind of in a position to do the thing we talked about earlier and go on a run. What's got to happen? What are the keys for the Niners?
I think the 49ers have to figure out a way to make the Buffalo Bills uncomfortable, as if the weather can't make them uncomfortable as well, right? 49ers have to add to that. Can you put certain pressure on Josh Allen and force him to throw some of those boneheaded throws that we haven't seen him really throw this year, but we've seen him throw in the past? Get him to turn the ball over a couple of times. Then the 49ers have to turn around, take advantage of that, and be able to run the ball. They have not ran the ball well since Christian McCaffrey has come back. And in turn, that's putting the 49ers in some tough situations, some longer situations, and they just don't play well in, 2nd and 10, 3rd and 10. Most teams obviously get a little worse in those situations. I think the 49ers are probably one of the worst because they don't have these great passing concepts. Teams understand how to attack the 49ers. Teams know that if you get the 49ers in that position, they don't change a lot of the stuff they do up front. So if you send some blitzes, they're going to throw to their hot. Teams are forcing them to throw to the hot guy right now, and teams are also rallying down and making tackles. So the 49ers, they got to get ahead of the sticks early in downs, and that's going to start with really being able to run the ball. Again, something they have not done very well since Christian McCaffrey has come back.
Crockett, it looks like we got a lot of similar thoughts here because my keys kind of align with what you're thinking for the 49ers side of things. Number one is I have written down, have the right plan to defend the run. And I know that you mentioned that the 49ers run game maybe not as dynamic as it's been, but the Bills run defense can be a little leaky. They play a ton of light boxes, man. They'll give you 6-man boxes all game long. They live in nickel, right? Taron Johnson, big-time slot corner, and he basically plays strong side linebacker for this team. And that's going to invite some runs. And the Bills want that. They want you to try to run the ball on them and tighten the screws in the red zone. Like, that's how they play defense. But you got to have the right plan because obviously, especially, if Brock Purdy's going to play and maybe that comes with some limitations with the shoulder. If he doesn't play and it's Allen again, they're going to run the ball, right? And so this Shanahan run scheme, the Bills play it all the time. They get the Dolphins a couple of times a year, right? They had LaFleur with the Jets for a little bit. They've seen this run scheme, and it gives them some troubles, man. The trap blocks, the whams, the misdirections, the horizontal stretch, it can give the Bills some problems. They can get creased a little bit. And so the Bills are going to have the right plan to defend the run. And maybe this is a week where you try to, roll that safety down and give your box a little bit more support if you're not as concerned with their ability to throw the football against you. Number two, on defense, you got to hunt the ball. The Niners are turning the ball over 12% of their drives. That's bottom 10 in the NFL. And the Bills are very good at taking away the football. They get a turnover or a takeaway 18% of the drives. They've had a takeaway in every single game this year. I think the streak's at like 14 or 15 games dating back to last year. They're a big play defense. And I know that the names are different in the secondary, but they still have that same mindset of going and taking away the football. And I think that'll be a big opportunity for them, not only to, obviously break on some balls where they have some really talented guys in terms of ball skills with Rasul Douglas, with Christian Benford, with Taron Johnson, with Terrell Bernard at linebacker, but they're good at forcing fumbles as well. And so I think they got to be hunting the football in this game and see if you can kind of use something that's been a strength for you and a weakness for them against the Niners in this game. And then on offense, I think this is about leaning into an efficient style of offense, which is how the Bills want to play. The Niners are a pretty good team metrically at defending vertical passes. They're not a very blitz aggressive team defensively. And so just take the profits, sit there and take the profits, rely on your yards after catch, run the football efficiently and stay ahead of the sticks. That way you don't put them in a position where they can, tee off take advantage of some long and late downs and maybe, break on a pass and get a game-changing takeaway. So for me, it's have the right plan to defend the run, hunt the football, and be efficient on offense.
I think a lot of times we focus a lot on the offense, on the defense, and those phases of the game. But there's a third phase that's very important in special teams, and that's where the 49ers have not been very good.
31st in DVOA, Croc. What I was going to ask you about, what is going on with the Niners special teams, man?
Oh, man, I mean, they've been bad. So there's three phases of football, right? You got, offense, defense, special teams. And then within the special teams, you have a bunch of different phases, there as well. And I feel like at different times, the 49ers have just been bad at all of them. You have a really good punter with Mitch Wishnowsky, who he's been out a couple of weeks now. We'll see if he's coming back. But even if he's not back, the punt unit, it's just been the coverage, not great. The 49ers have given up big returns in key moments. Sometimes it's bitten them in the butt. Sometimes it hasn't. The Rams beat the 49ers early in the year. A big part of that was 49ers punted it late in the game. The Rams returned it into their own territory, setting up a short field for them to be able to take the lead and beat the 49ers. And to see how the Seahawks, 49ers, they're kind of trying to run away with this game. They kick it off, and boom, there's a big return for a touchdown against the Niners. I mean, just at different times, the coverage unit has been bad. The 49ers have muffed a couple fumbles where you have a rookie back there, and maybe it's him, but it's not even his fault because his protector is getting pushed into his lap, where now he's getting distracted and the guy's hitting him and he's trying to catch the ball. I mean, any way that you can mess up special teams, the 49ers have done it, which leads you to the point or question, why is this special teams coordinator not fired yet with the 49ers being so bad right now? But in this type of weather where anything can kind of happen, you punt the ball, you could have a fumble, it could hit somebody, the ball's going to bounce a little funny in the snow or on the wet grounds. The 49ers have to be much better on special teams if they want to have a chance to beat the Buffalo Bills this Sunday.
Yeah, the weather can be a neutralizer. I mean, obviously the Bills might be a little bit more accustomed to being in those elements, but the ball's still slippery for the Bills, right? And so you could look at the weather as perhaps a bit of a neutralizer in this game if you start to see that type of stuff happen. And who knows, man, weather in Western New York at this time of year changes. There's certainly snow in the forecast. Will it be snowing during the game? What does it look like to get there? What does it look like during? Hold your breath. We don't know what's going to happen.
Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. You could take an early look at some Thanksgiving football lines. The Lions are massive favorites in their first game of the day against the Bears. FanDuel has Detroit laying 10.5. I kind of like the Bears. Is that weird? FanDuel also doesn't feel like Caleb Williams and company will put up a lot of points. The Bears total over-under set at 18.5. I might take the over and the Bears to cover. I bet I can get some nice plus odds on that. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
I'll be honest with you up front. I do not believe that Michigan is going to beat Ohio State, but it is not impossible for Michigan to do so.
You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines.
And hearing some things from Wink Martindale and Kirk Campbell even Kirk Campbell, give me a little bit of, I guess, hope going into the shoe. Because certainly no one thought I was on this very show, not in this very room, but on this very camera, probably with this very lens telling you back in, I would say, 2 years and 3 days ago ish, that I had no belief that without a healthy Blake Corum, Michigan was going to be able to beat Ohio State. And they ended up beating him worse than they did in 2021, right? But then at that time, we knew that obviously Michigan had some offensive pieces and obviously was stout defensively under Jesse Minter, that it stood to reason that Michigan had a very strong possibility. This is not that, right? So I'm not trying to say, and that's why I lead off saying I don't expect him to win, because, there's going to be these select Buckeyes who love to cut parts of my show out and post them online and be like, look at the dumb thing this idiot said, right? Like, okay, well, watch the rest of it. What did I say? But some of the quotes from the Inside Michigan Football, apologies there. Some parts of Inside Michigan Football, there were some things that were being said that I thought were enlightening. Now, certainly part of it is the fact that Wink Martindale is not going into this game with the, like, yeah, I'm an NFL guy. I mean, good luck, Chip Kelly and Ryan Day, but I'm just so far ahead of y'all. He's not going into that. It actually, and this isn't a good example, and this is also because I've been watching I've been playing Star Wars Outlaws a little bit lately, and I've thus been watching a little bit of kind of going through some of the Star Wars, and I put on, as I was going to bed the other night, The Rise of Skywalker, and so I read this in the same tone. Kylo Ren says, ask Emperor Palpatine, "What can you give me?" Wink Martindale responds, "Everything." But okay, here's what he said about what worries him about Ohio State. Everything. I mean, seriously, they're just a machine right now offensively, and we know that it's going to be a physical game. To me, that's advantage us in the physicality area. But we have done a great job of patching together a secondary essentially all season. And it's going to be a test because you've got to have some premier guys to go against premier guys, and it's going to be a great, great challenge for us. Right before that, he said, I was really glad to see Amir Hall step up in the Northwestern game, but this game we have coming up, so completely different animal. You know it. They got 3 werewolves out there that we got to try to cover, and it's going to be a great challenge for us. Well, as we've talked about the last few days, it all starts up front. If Ohio State has had a patchwork offensive line, Indiana did a really good job for a time being able to work through that line, but it didn't end up paying much dividends overall. Same thing could be said for a lot of teams. Northwestern for a half. I'd say more like a quarter. Kind of dominated up front, and then Ohio State kind of started to assert itself. You look at Oregon, who pretty much asserted itself all game. Michigan's not on the level. I mean, it's on the level with Northwestern from an offensive standpoint, but the other 2 offenses, of course, it's not. But it just needs to be able to have enough, right? That's kind of the problem that we sometimes have when we look at games like this, is we compare the statistics, and chances are that's going to give us a pretty accurate idea of how the game is going to go. Yes. But at the same time, it is, what if the game plan works out? What if they, everything kind of built to this? How much did Michigan kind of store up for this game? How much of the in-season stuff or the preseason, in-season stuff prepare them for this moment? That brings me to Kirk Campbell. And for some reason, it just kicked me out entirely of where I wanted to be. There we go. Kirk Campbell said something that really interested me. It piqued my interest. And I know we don't have a lot of trust and faith in Kirk Campbell. But he says about Ohio State. Let me get to the most part. In 22, they were really, really aggressive. Last year, they were really back. He's talking about what they did as far as the box is concerned, right? 2022, they really tried to load the box. Last year, they tried to play some more, cover 2. I'm not really sure because I wasn't exactly paying attention to like their actual coverages, but they weren't loading the box as much and backing those safeties and linebackers out a little bit. This year, they're back to the middle. They're not as aggressive, not as calm. So they're trying to get kind of a little bit more aggressive and dynamic, but not as much as they were in 22, where they could let up the huge play. So as he's saying, they're not going to play cover 0. Okay. And this continues. This is where this piqued my interest. We're going to end up discussing this on the other end, but let me get to this first. Going to the game plan, we've studied them 365 days a year. We watch them. The GAs, the analysts always break them down, so we have a good feel of what they're going to do and how they want to do it. So we meticulously put plays in the game plan throughout the season to try to play off them for when we play them. So it's going to be a part of what we do, part of what they don't think we can do, and what we're going to be able to execute really well that we've had in our back pocket for a while. I mean, that's the dream quote, because that's not the quote we've been getting generally from, Sharon last year going into the last 2 years going into the game. It's kind of like, oh, we're gonna do what we do, and they have to try to stop us. Jim Harbaugh would say, like, they're a really good team, but, they're gonna be really hard to beat, but we're gonna be really hard to beat too. So to kind of acknowledge that, like, we've got a little something that, and coming from Kirk Campbell, again, like I said, I know we don't have the trust and faith in it piques my interest a little bit. What do you know that we don't know, Kirk Campbell? Because that's clearly suggesting that.
Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. You could take an early look at some Thanksgiving football lines. The Lions are massive favorites in their first game of the day against the Bears. FanDuel has Detroit laying 10.5. I kind of like the Bears. Is that weird? FanDuel also doesn't feel like Caleb Williams and company will put up a lot of points. The Bears total over-under set at 18.5. I might take the over and the Bears to cover. I bet I can get some nice plus odds on that. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
The most important position matchup in this Clemson-South Carolina game overwhelmingly favors South Carolina.
You are Locked On Gamecocks, your daily podcast on the South Carolina Gamecocks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
But the one matchup that is clearly the most important matchup of this game, and it really is one of the most important matchups that South Carolina has whenever they step onto the field. It is the opponent's offensive line versus South Carolina's front four. And you could say front seven a lot of times too if you want, whatever. I'm going to say front four. And here's the thing, guys. We know what this South Carolina defense is capable of. We know what they've been able to do on the back end in the front seven, but especially up front. And being able to get after the quarterback and provide all these pressures. You're ranked third right now. Excuse me, third right now in the country in sacks, total sacks this year throughout 11 games. Now, let's put that in perspective, right? You talk about last year. Last year, this is a program that had 21 total sacks. It was 105th in the country, tied with Georgia Tech. You go to Georgia Tech, get a kid out of the portal from there, Kyle Kennard, been phenomenal. You almost double your output this year. Here's the thing that I think people don't understand about Clemson, and this is the matchup I think it's most important, and I think it overwhelmingly favors South Carolina. And I'm going to get into a bit of the history as well, so it might not – some people might wonder why, like, oh, I don't know if that really matters as much. It does. It does. I want to set a few parameters here. Clemson is one of the best programs in the country over the last 15 years. Fair. There's very few programs that would trade spots or that wouldn't trade spots with Clemson based off of what, like, they won 2 national championships. They were able to beat Bama. Everyone knows that 2018 team, all these first-round draft picks, all that stuff. Matt Luke is their offensive line coach, and I love Matt Luke so much. Phenomenal interview, great dude. Come on, Matt Luke, former head coach, Ole Miss football. For those of you that don't know, that is a spot-on Matt Luke impression. I really like Matt Luke. I think he's going to do a great job there. Here's the thing. If there is a position that has ever been less of a focus and underutilized and grossly overlooked by Dabo Swinney and his staff, it's the offensive line. It's bad. It's bad. Like, this is a program that you look at all the 5 stars that they have brought in, all of the kids they have put into the NFL, all the first rounders, and we'll get into the numbers here in a second. You don't see it at this position, like at all. Offensive line, and let's start with this year's offensive line for Clemson has given up 18 sacks. That's 5th best in the ACC. I would venture to say they haven't faced anything close to what they are going to face this upcoming weekend, right? I think that's probably a fair assessment. In terms of tackles for loss, they've given up 60. That ranks 8th best in the ACC. Now let's look at the national, like where that lands nationally. Okay, 18 sacks allowed. You're sitting there right at 52nd in the country. That's on par with Alabama's giving up 18. Not really any other Power 4 teams or Power 5 teams that are around there. A&M's giving up 20. You're right around there, okay? Look at tackles for loss allowed. We talked about how many total they've given up. They've given up 60. That ranks 68. So you are outside of the top 50 nationally in both of those. And again, I will guarantee you, they have not faced anything close to what they have faced or what they will face on Saturday. They just haven't. I mean, you got some straight up effing assassins coming in there off the edge. And I'm not talking about just because of the way they do their celebrations. Dylan Stewart, Kyle Kennard off the edge. Boogie Huntley, Tonka Hemingway, Sanders, everybody in the middle. I'm getting pumped already. Here's the thing. This Clemson offensive line has some guys that were decent recruits and whatever. But that has never been a focal point of building a roster or building a team for Dabo Swinney. And it's one of the other many reasons you are seeing the downfall of him and his program right now. And that may sound dramatic. It may sound over the top or whatever. It's not. It's not. I joke with you guys all the time. That may sound dramatic. Well, I am dramatic, so I'm going to say it. It's not. Let's get into the numbers of this. So you look at like I'll bring up the last 5 years, right? Clemson signed 1 5-star offensive lineman. He starts at left tackle for him. They signed a total of 4, 7, so that's 11, 13. Sorry, guys, it's bad radio. 23 offensive linemen. 23 total offensive linemen. 10 of them, right? That's right. Hold on, I'm off. They've signed 19 offensive linemen. 19. 10 of them, half of them are 4 stars or better. And listen, that might not sound like that's not a big deal. Okay? You've signed as many 4-star offensive linemen as you have 3-star offensive linemen at Clemson. What's happened over time is a lot of those 3 stars are the ones that are starting, right? And the development of those guys is what's even sadder to watch because it's one thing to have more. They probably have recruited the offensive line better than South Carolina. We're not comparing South Carolina to Clemson at the offensive line because Clemson doesn't have a defensive line that's as good as South Carolina's. Okay? Like, it's going to be good, and this offensive line for South Carolina is going to have to hold their own, and they've been playing a lot better. But here's what I keep going back to. You look at how you looked against Alabama. Look how you looked against LSU. Look how you looked against Ole Miss. I mean, A&M. Those are teams that have 5 stars and 4 stars and top 100 and top 247 and top 300, whatever metric you want to go by. They've got elite recruits and blue chip talent all over their offensive line. And you ran through them like blank through a tin horn, as Nick Saban would say. Like this is a defensive line that has whoever has been in front of them has not stood a chance. They have not stood a chance. And not only do I think that continues, because of course I think it continues, but you look at like the way the season's gone. All right, they've had the least amount of production of their last however many games, which is Texas A&M, Vanderbilt, Missouri, and then Wofford. They've had a total of 11 sacks in the last 4 games. Not as great as the start they were off to. Whatever you were talking about, getting like 9 against Oklahoma, 4 against Bama. They were averaging around 4. It seemed like per game there for a while. Here's the deal: Vanderbilt is a team that runs the ball a lot. Missouri ran the ball a ton in that game. I think they had like 30 rushes from the running back alone or something. It was crazy. And Brady Cook. Clemson's going to have to throw the ball to beat you. They're going to have to throw the ball to beat you. When you look at the emphasis that this roster has had placed on it from Dabo Swinney, these are the actual numbers. And I gave you the recruits. Let's talk about the development again. You've been at Clemson for 15 years. 15 draft classes have come through Clemson since Dabo Swinney's been the head coach. He's had 83 total draft picks, 18 first-rounders, 30 first- and second-rounders. Of the 83 total NFL draft picks that Dabo Swinney has had, only 6 have been offensive linemen. Only 6. Only one has gone in the first 2 rounds of an NFL draft. That was Jackson Carman in 2021. You've had six total offensive linemen drafted at Clemson since 2009. 6 out of 83. Let's do the math on that real quick. That is 1 out of every 14. I think that's around what, 0.68, 0.69, 0.7. That's so bad. It's 7% of your players. I think that's right. My main point here is when you talk about, or it's 9%. I don't know. I should have just brought the calculator out. My main point is, you can sit here and say, well, you know what? They have good recruits that are there now. They've done a better job. I do like Matt Luke. I think they've gotten better up there. Blah, blah, blah. My point is, this is a position that has never been a focus for Dabo Swinney. It has never been a focus for Dabo. He has not cared about bringing in elite talent there. He has not cared about developing elite talent there. And on Saturday, that position unit that he has had the least amount of focus or care or emphasis on since he's been at Clemson is going to be the one that has the most important role on the field. I just don't believe that in 15 years, you've had a program with this level of elite capability and getting to national championships and winning national championships and dominating the ACC and all those things. Go nationally and get whoever you want for 5-star players and all these recruits. How have you been so bad at getting elite offensive linemen to come in? And how have you somehow been even worse at making them not only elite, but developing them into being NFL draft picks? Not even elite NFL draft picks, just draft picks. 6 total. Again, this is a program that wants to be compared to Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia. Give me another one here, guys. Maybe you could say Oregon, LSU. These elite programs that seem to always be at the top, like near the top at least. I guess you could say Michigan. I mean, how do you the games are won and lost in the trenches? We say it all the time. And it's something that Dabo Swinney could care less about. It's a huge deal, in my opinion. I think it's a huge deal. And I think it's going to rear its ugly head on Saturday.
Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. You could take an early look at some Thanksgiving football lines. The Lions are massive favorites in their first game of the day against the Bears. FanDuel has Detroit laying 10.5. I kind of like the Bears. Is that weird? FanDuel also doesn't feel like Caleb Williams and company will put up a lot of points. The Bears total over-under set at 18.5. I might take the over and the Bears to cover. I bet I can get some nice plus odds on that. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
We've waited 13 long years for this since Texas A&M ran to the SEC.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
One of the biggest football games of the season. Still a lot to play for the Texas A&M Aggies, and a lot to play for the Texas Longhorns. SEC championship implications, college football playoff implications. The entire world will have their eyes on Texas A&M on Saturday night. 118 matchups between these two storied programs, and they played every year from 1915 to 2011. Then, of course, Texas A&M, like Texas fans like to say, ran to the SEC. And now Texas has followed them to the SEC, and they play once again on Saturday night. Before we get into the football matchup, Andrew, I want to ask you, how old were you? Where were you the last time that these two teams played in November 2011?
I was 11. So I was not very old, which is why I think like a lot of our players for A&M and for Texas, I'm learning about this rivalry. Obviously, I watched it. I enjoyed it. I understood it. But when you're 11, you don't quite get it. Same, I think, as like I said, the players for both teams. So this is just going to be – it's going to be a real awakening for some of these players and people like myself who have been fans for a while now but haven't quite seen it as adults. It's going to be exciting.
Yeah, I don't think it'll take long if the players haven't already grasped how big of a matchup this is or how big the rivalry is, or if they can't feel it yet. As we record this on Tuesday morning, I think certainly by the time the game comes or when you run in that stadium and you just see, all of those Texas and all of those Texas A&M fans just rocking in Kyle Field, you'll certainly get a sense very early on of how much this game means to so many people in the Lone Star State. In November 2011, I was 18 years old, right? I had took a semester off. I had graduated high school in May of 2011, and then I went to basic training in AIT for the Army Reserves, and so I was back home waiting to go to college. So I was 18 years old. I'm now 31, with a bachelor's and a master's. At that time, I hadn't even started college. So it's just been so long since these two teams have played. You talk about it all the time, that in the last matchup, Justin Tucker kicks the game-winning field goal, and he's gone on to have a Hall of Fame career in the National Football League since then, right? So long time between these two teams, but I don't think the passion in the rivalry has dipped at all. I get on Twitter every day. I've gotten on Twitter every day for years, and you see Texas fans and Texas A&M fans just arguing back and forth with no football played, right? I know they played in basketball. I know they played in baseball, but we know football will determine this rivalry. And there's been a lot of hate there for years, even without Texas and Texas A&M playing. How do A&M fans feel going into this rivalry game on Saturday against Texas?
Well, before I answer that, I think the funniest thing, my kind of welcome to this rivalry is when I started Locked On Aggies, about a year and a half ago, before Texas was even in the SEC. And I look at, in comments and I'm like, what are all these Texas fans doing here? We didn't even play you. And I'm like, well, there you go. You know what I mean? I just found that so funny. Like, here's these Texas fans. Now it makes more sense. But I was like, I get 7 comments a day from Texas fans and we don't even play them. But so I always found that hilarious, and it kind of tells you what you need to know about this rivalry. But heading into this game, like you said in previewing this, there's a lot to play for both of these teams. Texas A&M is still alive thanks to Oklahoma and Alabama in that game. They're still alive despite the losses to South Carolina and Auburn to make the SEC championship game. You're a win away against your biggest rival at home. I think that the vibes are high, which you'd be surprised the way you lost to Auburn. The vibes are high right now because this team and this staff and these fans know that this team is still playing for something. In year one under Elko, you're still playing for something. In Thanksgiving weekend, you're playing important football. And I don't think a lot of people would have expected that out of this Texas A&M fans. So there's a lot of excitement heading into this game. And I think Texas A&M fans really believe they can win this one.
Yeah, no, I think Texas A&M fans are excited. Thankfully, you still have something to play for because you look at it going into Saturday. Texas takes care of business against Kentucky. If Texas A&M takes care of business against Auburn, you set up one of the biggest games in this rivalry's history. You set up a winner gets into the SEC championship scenario. Just flat out, right? Whoever wins that game on Saturday night will be there. And then what I like to say is, in typical Aggie fashion, right? Whenever you start to believe in Texas A&M, whenever you start to hype them up, whenever you start to give them credit, whenever you think they've gotten over the hump, then you lose to Auburn in 4 overtimes. You drop the ball, literally. You drop the ball in the end zone when you have a chance to keep the game going. What happened against Auburn, and what gives you faith that this team can turn it around against a different beast, the Texas Longhorns, this Saturday? When you now lost, and I want to mention this, you've lost your last 2 conference games,
Yeah.
right? After, I think starting off 5-0, you've lost to South Carolina and now lost to Auburn your last 2 conference games. So what gives you confidence? What happened against Auburn, and what gives you confidence that you can turn it around against Texas?
Looking at against Auburn, it's always scary when you hear the name Peyton Thorne and kicked your behind. When those 2 things come into one sentence, you've done something wrong. And that's what happened. I mean, Peyton Thorne, receivers were wide open. I mean, one of the touchdowns of Cam Coleman, I could have thrown and caught, and that's a dead serious statement. I mean, like the secondary just vanished. Auburn just threw the ball all over Texas A&M. So when you ask what gives me confidence about this game, I'll tell you this. Looking at the way the season's gone, A&M is not, and it's weird because Jimbo Fisher's gone, but they have not played great on the road. They dominated Florida kind of before Lagway dialed in. I'd be a lot more scared about that game if you played Florida, now. You dominate Florida on the road. You kind of look against Mississippi State, sneak out with a win, and then lose to South Carolina and Auburn. But you've been, aside from that Notre Dame game where Connor Rigman was your starter and he was, just putrid, you have been really good at home. I mean, you've beaten LSU. You've beaten Missouri. You've beaten 2 solid football teams at home in great environments. There's one thing, and once again, I was in Austin last weekend. It was my first time in Austin, and you can't take anything away from the atmosphere there. Incredible atmosphere at that Kentucky game, I thought. But, the atmosphere at Kyle Field is going to be electric. Electric. It's going to be awesome. That's what gives me, I'd say, confidence. I'll probably predict Texas to win this game. I'll be honest with you. I probably will when we get to that here in a little bit. But Texas A&M could win this game in front of this elite crowd. I think you can't say otherwise.
Yeah, I do have to remind you and the fans that the 12th man, as great as they are, they can't actually play on the field, right? You still got to line up 11 against 11. So we'll certainly see, what happens. I want to go ahead and get into the break and then come back. Actually, you know what? Before we get to the break, we can talk about this before we get to the break. Texas A&M, right? I believe Trey Zune III. Is it Zune? How do you say his name?
Yeah, Trey
He's
Zune.
put some bulletin board material out there for the Texas Longhorns, and I don't normally, or necessarily believe in bulletin board material. I feel like this is the type of game where you're going to get up for it regardless, right? Yes. Texas A&M, if you need to hear some comments in the media to turn up for this game, then you're not ready for this matchup, right? But he's come out and he said some things about Anthony Hill, right? Anthony Hill's a great player, but he's not anything we haven't seen before, right? He's not anything we haven't dealt with, basically minimizing Anthony Hill, one of the best players in the country. And then he talked about the atmosphere that you talked about. He feels bad for Texas, right, and their players because they may not be ready for an environment like this. What are your thoughts? Do you like it, love it, or hate it that Trey Zune has decided to come out and essentially poke the bear against the Texas Longhorns going into this matchup on Saturday?
I've always been anti that personally. And to me, there's 2 schools of thought to this, and it kind of depends on the type of athlete you are, competitor you are. I've always been in my playing career in sports. I was always well, I'm just gonna go out there and play. I'm not gonna say anything. Obviously, I'm not in front of media. That was you know what I mean. Like it's not like the same thing, but that's just how I took advantage of when I played sports. I just don't think you do that. You don't want to give another team the extra motivation. I agree with you. It's probably not really needed in this game, the bulletin board material, but it's now there. And some people are going to say, oh, come on, man. We love trash talk. And I'm all for it. I'm not saying I hate it. I just don't think that there's a reason to poke the bear. Go out there, respect your opponent, and show them on the field. That's kind of been my take on this. But I get the folks that say, heck yeah, it's a rivalry. We hate you. You hate us. Let's talk crap. I get both sides of it. But I personally am pro kind of staying away from it.
Yeah, I'm not advocating that Texas does it. But I do think in a game like this, like, why not lean into it, right? Best case scenario, you look like a genius. Worst case scenario, you lost, and then people just poke a little bit more fun at you, but they were already going to do that if you lost anyway. To me, these 2 teams hate each other, right? Yeah. You should. The fan bases hate each other. Go out there and talk a little bit of mess, right? The worst thing that can happen is you lose the game, and then they say, ha, 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 you were talking, and you lost the game. But I'm, a fan of, especially in games like this. Now, if it was Texas, Kentucky, or Texas, Florida, it's like just go out there and play. Texas A&M, lean into it. I'm all for it.